this, that means the Chiefs are back in the Super Bowl again. Let's talk some Chiefs, guys. Welcome to the Chief of the North on RGR Football. I am Seth Geiser, a Minnesota Chiefs fan, and the Chief of the North, or whatever else you really feel like calling me. I'm pretty laid back that way. And as I try to every week, and often fail to every week, especially lately, and you, dear listeners, have been so patient and so kind overall. I mean, some people are mean, but that's just life. I try to talk a little bit of Chiefs every week here on RGR Football, talk about things that are standing out to me. And obviously, since the last time we talked, and since the day job has been taking me away a little bit more than I would like from these things that are really important, Chiefs are back in the Super Bowl. Time is a flat circle. Everything that has happened before will happen again. Vanity of vanities. It's all meaningless. There's nothing new underneath the sun. Little Ecclesiastes references for you. And it's a good time to be a Chiefs fan. The Super Bowl frenzy has already started with the media coverage that I'm sure many watched the opening night or whatever they call it, media night, the Super Bowl. I usually don't watch much of it, if I'm being perfectly honest, because it's just all so much. But I do like to catch the highlights. And I suppose the highlights were a lot of 49ers fans booing Patrick Mahomes with basically death in his eyes. After that, Travis Kelsey getting fired up by it. And basically just a lot of talk from the Chiefs about how great their opponent is, which is always fun to see. And they're right. The Niners are a great team. They deserve to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a great game. And so what I want to do is talk about a few things stemming from the AFC Championship victory over the Ravens. By the way, shout out to the Chiefs beating the Ravens. Not so much a shout out to Ravens fans, at least the ones who are online. I'm sure if any of you are watching this who aren't terminally online, I'm sure you handled it with aplomb. The majority of Ravens fans I saw online were trying to think of the right word here, but I'm not sure I can think of one that would be not uncouth, as it were. But the Chiefs were able to hold off the Ravens. Honestly, 17-10 victory that wasn't as close as that final score indicated. I will go to my grave telling anyone who will listen that had the Chiefs needed to score again, they would have scored again. Well, Seth, were you saying they weren't trying to score? No, I'm not saying that. We'll actually get to that in a minute when I talk about Patrick Mahomes' film review, which is up and available on the Chief of the North newsletter. So I'm going to talk about him. I'm going to try to talk about Drew Tranquil and Chris Jones a little bit. I'm going to try to talk about Travis Kelsey a little bit. Try to talk about Andy Reid and Steve Spagnuolo, mostly Steve Spagnuolo. I'm going to try to talk about the AFC Championship in a way that fast forward, looking at the Super Bowl next week. And I'm going to try to talk about a couple of things that I have on my eyes on. Oh, in the meantime, if you're interested, there's a special running on the Chief of the North newsletter. If you'd like to subscribe for $6 a year, you can just go to the most recent article, which is the Mahomes AFC Championship review. There's a link there. Anytime the Chiefs make the Super Bowl, I try to have like a super special deal. Generally speaking, for people that, normally the price is like $12 a year and $6 a year. I know it doesn't, maybe that makes a difference because that can. And I've been in a position where $6 made an incredible difference for me. So anytime the Chiefs make the Super Bowl, I want to make sure that literally anyone who wants to subscribe can subscribe. Also, if you're in a position where you can't subscribe, just paid content isn't something that you can do. And again, I've been there. Reach out to me on Twitter, DM me, and we'll figure something out because I never want someone to not be able to follow work that they want to follow and follow the Chiefs as close as they want to follow them because of something as silly as money. All right, let's talk about Patrick Mahomes and the AFC Championship. Here's what I want to do. In the most recent film review, what I really did was I covered playing it safe plus whatever it takes is the title I came up with. And here's why. First of all, I want to note that Mahomes has basically, the overarching point of the entire article is that Mahomes has basically adapted yet again to being another new kind of quarterback. And that's the thing that makes Mahomes special. He can be whatever you need him to be for virtually any situation. And he showed that again against the Ravens. And that's going to circle back to what I'd said about had they needed to score, they could have in the second half. Not that they weren't trying, but they weren't trying their hardest. So this, of course, you've seen this a million times, maybe not from this angle, though, this back shoulder throw to Travis Kelsey, one of my favorite throws of the game. I love how multiple times against the Ravens, Mahomes was just taking what the defense gave him in terms of matchups. Here, he knows that he's got Kelsey one-on-one with no help. Even against Kyle Hamilton, he knows that's a mismatch, especially on a back shoulder throw. Perfect placement, can't defend that. One of my favorite plays elsewise was, and this is something I'm going to be talking about leading into the Super Bowl, because I think it's interesting what they do here to punish the Ravens for playing man coverage, which is Watson's little motion here. But you see Mahomes, same thing, three-step drop, back of the foot, fires for an important third down conversion. This is when the Chiefs in the second half had a 2-score lead and were basically playing the ball control game. And not necessarily just the attempt to bleed the clock. That was a priority. But it was basically, okay, we'll get the ball on like the 20. Let's get at least a few first downs, drive to the 40, pin them back deep. Okay, well, then we'll get the ball again around the 20 or 30 and then try to pin them back deep. They really did play the ball control game, and you saw that frequently from Mahomes. And then, of course, when he absolutely needed to, and this is the whatever it takes aspect of it, he would make a play like on this fourth down to Kelsey. This is a new iteration of Mahomes that we saw in the second half. I actually, there was one play where he had MVS open down the field, he'd gotten a little separation from man coverage on the left side of the field. Well, still sort of between the hashes at that point. But anyway, he wasn't like running down the sideline. And Mahomes actively, I didn't chart it as a missed shot because I saw Mahomes look at him and decide, nope, I'm not going down the field here. I think it was a first or second down. It was a play where he could have taken a shot, and Reed dialed up a few shot opportunities. By and large, the Ravens had them covered very well, with the exception of this play where Mahomes actively chose not to do it. And this is what I mean by a new iteration of Mahomes. You can call it keep away Mahomes, you can call it game manager Mahomes, you can call it whatever you want, but it was essentially him deciding, I'm not going to do anything that will create a risk, that because we're up by 2 scores and our defense is playing lights out. And he's talked about this year. People always thought it was just lip service because it's not the kind of thing we're used to seeing from Mahomes. But we directly saw it in the AFC Championship, him playing a much more conservative style of play, saying mistake avoidance is the ultimate goal here. And they kept that up throughout the entire second half, really. And they had some bad luck here and there too. And, stuff happens. But when you saw ultimately with the game on the line, when it was time, okay, you got to have it. Absolutely. We can, it's 3rd and 9, a little over 2:15 left, give or take. Ravens are out of timeouts. You could run the ball and bleed off another 15 to 19 seconds and then punt the ball, pin them back inside the 10, force them to work. A lot of teams would have done that. Instead, Mahomes and Reed went for the kill shot and risked stopping the clock on the wrong side of the 2-minute warning, where to the point there was just enough time left that even a punt might not have, coincided with the 2-minute warning. So you're risking another stoppage in play. But they went for it. And then, of course, we all kind of know what happened there. I'm not sure if a lot of people have seen this view of this throw. It's just a beautiful moon ball to Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And so you see here, there's a little bit of pressure to the point where he can't really get his feet into it. But what I love about what he does here, even this deep shot, he takes it in the least risky possible way. He doesn't drag it way out here where MVS has had some problems running down and catching it. He basically drops it into his belly, saying, all you need to do is stop and catch while you're falling down. Now, that's tough in its own right. And hats off to MVS, whose playoff redemption tour is going terrifically. But it's just interesting to see Mahomes play it so safe and take advantage of the defense that he has. That's something that I think is going to play a big role against the 49ers, because it's just going to depend on how well the Chiefs defense plays. We saw last year, he had to win a shootout and was basically flawless throughout the entire game. I'm curious what it looks like against the Niners. There's a lot of, like I said, this week, I'm going to do 2 keys to the game type articles on the Chiefs North newsletter. One when the Chiefs have the ball, one when they don't. When they have the ball, I think their usage of Pacheco, as well as what the 49ers decide to do. The Niners are generally a zone-dependent defense. I'm curious what they decide to do in terms of that, because the Chiefs have generally been more successful against zone. So those are just a couple of things I'm going to be looking at, but you can check that out later this week on the Chiefs North newsletter. Another thing I want to hit on real quick, because again, I'm just trying to cover everything that stood out to me in the AFC Championship that I think will play a big role in the Super Bowl. One of the most obvious ones, this man, Chris Jones. I've said so much about Jones that I really don't need to say a whole lot about him here. I wrote about him and Drew Tranquil after the AFC Championship because both of them made really big impacts in ways that aren't necessarily reflected in the box score. So that's why I chose them. And plays like this that show up as, a quarterback hit, maybe if you're looking at deeper stats, really could have been a pick 6 if McDuffie had held on to it. But this type of quick win It's the sort of thing that you can count on Jones to do. It's obviously going to be one of the keys to the game against the Niners, whose right side of their line isn't quite as good. Like Trent Williams is obviously a stud. I would be shocked if the Chiefs matched up Jones against Trent Williams even one time, because why bother? Like, why would you do that when you don't have to? Trent Williams is an eraser of people. And even as great as Jones is, and I think they could have a wonderful battle there that Jones could win some, lose some, but why do that when there's a right tackle who's significantly worse? So I'm guessing you're going to see when Jones does line up on the edge, I think it's generally going to be probably off the right tackle, unless they've got some kind of stunt worked out. Leo Chanel, or not Leo Chanel, who also, hey, shout out to him with the tackle he made on this play. But this gets led up to, the other guy I wrote about was Drew Tranquil. You will never see a stat for this right here. So Tranquil starts off here, basically playing to control the edge, but he's matched up against a fullback who weighs about 70 pounds more than he is, because Ricard weighs like, what is it, 300, 305? Look at how Tranquil gets his pads low, gets his hands inside, and actually holds up the edge here, and even penetrates just a little bit to where there's no way for this run to continue around the side. He's got to get redirected in. And in the meantime, Karlaftis and Chanel have done their jobs. They've also done a good job here. Shout out to Mike Pennell, who did a great job holding up where and being where he needed to be too. That sort of thing by Drew Tranquil is the sort of thing that he is not getting enough credit for. He's one of the major differences between this year's defense and last year's defense. His ability as a run blitzer, his ability to be a physical presence when he needs to, but also his ability to play quarterback spy here, creep up, control the gap, make the tackle. This is just textbook stuff. Help make the quarterback freak out a little bit, but do not lose that contain. And then in the meantime, do you also need him to sprint out to take away Mark Andrews as the hot read, which then allows that same pressure we saw earlier? Look where Jackson's looking here. He can't go to Andrews because of the coverage by Tranquil. That sort of stuff matters so much. Tranquil's ability to kind of be an everything guy has really helped differentiate the Chiefs defense when he's healthy versus when he's not. They've been really, really good regardless. But in terms of, like, there's a lot of talk about, the Niners are going to try to keep the Chiefs in base sets. That's a very different thing with Drew Tranquil on the field than it is without him, because when Tranquil is healthy, their base sets can still be strong against the pass. Now, does that mean we want him, alone in space against Kittle or McCaffrey? Of course, of course not. You don't want any linebacker alone in space against those guys. But that does leave you with a very athletic, very good, very smart coverage player, in addition to Willie Gay being an incredibly athletic player as well, that might allow you to control some of that sideline to sideline stuff that the Niners do. That's something I'm going to be keeping my eye on as well. And then, of course, we have to talk about the GOAT. And honestly, I've had a long week arguing with Patriots fans about this, because they rightfully revere Rob Gronkowski, one of the greatest players to ever play the game. Incredible player. And I just appreciate the way Kelsey and Gronk talk about this particular debate. Just something to look at with this snap. Watch these hands. I love this so much. Doesn't push off and waits till the last possible second to make the grab. I just love it so much. I wrote about Travis Kelsey and about it being time to shift the conversation about him. He surpassed Jerry Rice in all-time catches. He's going to start closing in on him in yards and touchdowns as well, depending on even just one more postseason. Those are records that I don't think anyone ever thought would be broken. And I think it's time to talk about Kelsey in a different light than just, is he the greatest tight end of all time? Is he one of the greatest pass catchers to ever live? Certainly one of the most clutch, if you're going to go by performance in the playoffs. And that's something that I think that conversation needs to be expanded. And I wanted to give Chiefs fans, this is just such a crazy stat, Kelsey's last 12 playoff games. This is absurdity. It's a ridiculous thing to do. So here's what I'll say. We can have more about is Kelsey the GOAT conversations in the offseason. We'll probably talk about it on Only Weird Games. Here's what I would say. Kelsey being extraordinary as a receiver and being a decent blocker, the idea that he's a bad blocker is ridiculous. He's not as good now as he was throughout the majority of his career, but he's 34 now. And respectfully, if we're going to go by how someone's blocking when they're 34, I think that hurts Gronk more than it hurts Kelsey, because Gronk is not playing. I'm not saying that to be a jerk, but if you're going to talk about what someone's doing at 34, then you got to talk about what someone's doing at 34. The thing about Kelsey is that in terms of, and this is something that I tweeted about, and then a former Patriots player got pretty upset with me, and it was a whole thing. I'd hoped he would engage more to maybe help enlighten people. That didn't really happen, but that's okay. People talk all the time about how Rob Gronkowski's ability as a blocker opens up windows for an offense, which is absolutely true. His ability to be a very, very high level and elite receiver, as well as being an elite blocker, definitely opens up some things. However, Kelsey being not just an elite receiver, which he is, and he's a better receiver than Gronk. Gronk is a better contested catch guy. Kelsey's better in a lot of other aspects in terms. You can talk about yards after catch. I think they're pretty equivalent there, although Kelsey was almost always at the top of that. Gronk ran a more limited route tree than Kelsey. It's not a shot at him. It's just, I mean, what? And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Run down that seam, big guy. And if they can't stop you, I'd run. If I coached prime Gronk, I would have him run down the seam 20 times a game, because why? Why would you do anything other than what works? However, having a receiver like Kelsey who can line up at any single spot on the field, whether it's, as the X, Y, or Z receivers, whether it's on the line, whether it's as an H-back, any of those things, and run any route in the route tree and separate from man coverage in that way, that opens up things as well. And that kind of gets lost in the conversation, that it's not just the fact that Kelsey's such a great receiver, it's that he's such a unique one in terms of what tight ends can do, what a 6'5", 250-pound man can do. And that's something that needs to be explored. Does that mean blocking's not important? No. But is being an average to decent blocker versus an elite blocker, what matters more in the passing game? Being better in that area, does that matter more? Does that outstrip that? And that's a logical conversation that everyone can have, but it at least helps us by at least framing the conversation that way. It allows us to at least have a conversation as opposed to just fan bases yapping at each other. I personally think what Kelsey adds to the passing game is more valuable than what's added in the running game. And I also think it's more scarce. I think the difference between a perfectly fine blocking tight end versus an elite blocking tight end, it's that difference doesn't make that much of a difference, in my opinion. With offensive line, I've talked about this before, or any kind of run blocking, it's all about not losing. It's not about necessarily winning. If you complete your assignment, it doesn't make a run go any farther if you pancake a guy versus walling him off. Additionally, it's a lot easier to find a guy who's a good blocker than a good receiver as a tight end. Scarcity matters when we're talking about value, right? So, and if you're talking about the greatest of all time, value is a part of that conversation. So again, these are just things to consider in the Kelsey Gronk discussion. One thing that I wish is that we didn't have to almost feel like we're tearing one guy down to lift another guy up. But it's a conversation that's being had this week, so I figured I'd have it here real quick. The final thing I want to talk about from the AFC Championship game is Spags. This is one of my favorite snaps of Spags. Justin Reed did a great job here too, man. Make running backs block, because this right here, that's ugly. One of the great things about this snap is that immediately prior to the snap, they had actually had Justin Reed lined up over the tight end here to where they were creating the appearance of man with two deep, right? Then immediately before the snap, Justin Reed shifts from over here to inside to show blitz. And now suddenly what they're showing at this point right before the snap. And remember, Jackson's made his pre-snap reads. He's called out his protections. They've got it kind of figured out. And to his credit, his protection did account for Reed. It's just his running back made a crummy block. But now what they're showing here is man with single high, and you're going to have someone rotating back a little bit here. Unless, of course, one of these guys is blitzing, and maybe you end up with, Mike Edwards here in coverage. There's a lot of different things that can happen here, right? And it's such a fun thing to see how Spags presents all these opportunities, all these options for what a quarterback is supposed to consider. And he does that in order to try to get a free runner or a runner with an advantage against the quarterback. And Spags did that over and over and over and over against the Ravens. I expect him to do it again against the Niners. I think you're going to see plenty of too high, but you're going to see a lot of disguises and a lot of rotating immediately before the snap. And that's where Brock Purdy is going to have to play a better game, a better overall game than what he's played the last several weeks, if he wants to be able to put up points consistently. The Niners have one of the best groups of position of skill position guys that I've ever seen on one team. It's unbelievable the talent they have, but the ball's got to come out, and it's got to come out appropriately. And so far this postseason, Spags has been a step ahead of everyone. Kyle Shanahan is either him or Reed are the best in the game Maybe throw McDaniel or McVay in there as well in the conversation. So Shanahan's going to have a great plan, but it's worth noting Spags has done a good job against Shanahan overall in terms of trying to limit big plays. And that's going to be a really interesting chess match because Spags and Shanahan have played each other several times now, but neither of them are going to have it resemble what they did last time. So I'm excited to watch that. But the X factor there for the Niners is going to be Purdy. Can he make those adjustments pre and post snap that Spags asks everyone to do? It wouldn't surprise me if Spags decided to go the whole send the house treatment early to see how Purdy handles it. And he's handled the blitz really well so far this year. And there's enough of a sample size to say that he's good against it, and he's good at getting the ball out quickly, staying calm, making a smart decision. But Spags is kind of an expert on making quarterbacks make the wrong decision. So those are a couple things I've got my eye on. They're back in the Super Bowl. Life is good. We've gone a little bit long, but you know what? We had fun. I can't wait to see how it goes. I can't wait to talk about it after the fact. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things that you ought to do. You know the drill. And in the meantime, just keep in mind, guys, it is a great time to be a Chiefs fan again.